The Torah tells us that one day, two of Pharaoh's advisors, the very advisors who had actually thrown him into the dungeon in the first place, were thrown into the jail. Now, if you were languishing in a prison and you saw that two of your own tormentors were thrown into the prison too, how might you react? There's a word for this in English. It's called schadenfreude, taking pleasure in the pain of someone else. But Joseph reacts in a very interesting way. The Torah tells us, and you'll see it in text 10a, that it's on page 17, that Joseph sees these two, the butler and the baker of the king. It says here, take a look in text 10a. Each of them, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were imprisoned in the dungeon, dreamed the dream. Each one had his dream in the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. Joseph came to them in the morning, and he saw them, and they looked disturbed. He questioned Pharaoh's chamberlains who were with him in the prison of his master's house, asking, "Why are your faces poorly today?" Joseph asked them, "Why are you in a bad mood? Hello? Do you know where we are? We're in the dungeon, for heaven's sake. Why am I in a bad mood? Of course I'm in a bad mood. Am I supposed to be giddy? Right now I'm in the prison. I'm in the dungeon. I'm Pharaoh's advisor. I'm the butler. I'm the baker." But Joseph notices that something's not right. They told him we dreamed the dream. There was no interpreter for it. Joseph begins to interpret their dreams. Why would Joseph ask such a question? The reason is because Joseph noticed something was wrong. Joseph noticed that something was amiss. You'll see in text 10b, Joseph specified today he understood and expected that individuals suffering incarceration would be in a foul mood and look glum. However, he asked because he noticed the distinction between that specific day and every prior day of their incarceration. In other words, Joseph was experiencing a healthy dose of empathy. What does empathy actually mean? It's Professor Brené Brown on page 19, text number 11, who explains it. Empathy, the most powerful tool of compassion, is an emotional skill that allows us to understand what someone is experiencing and to reflect back that understanding, to be conscious, to be aware of the pain of someone else. Most researchers agree that there are at least two elements to empathy. There's cognitive empathy and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy means that you're aware of their feelings. Affective empathy is also known as emotional empathy. It means that you're actually feeling what they're feeling. Cognitive empathy, sometimes called perspective taking or mentalizing, is the ability to recognize and understand another person's emotions. But affective empathy, often called experience sharing, is one's own emotional attunement with another person's experience. So what seems to be happening over here is that Joseph is exhibiting cognitive empathy. That Joseph is aware of the pain of the other people, of the butler and the baker, and that's why he approached them and he says, "What's wrong? What's bothering you today?" Now, this is quite admirable, considering that if you remember the story of Joseph, which is really the second half of the book of Genesis, if you remember the story of Joseph, when he was a teenager, he was prancing around telling all of his brothers about his dreams, how they were all going to bow down to him. And to put it mildly, they didn't take it well, right? So he was completely oblivious as to how he was making other people feel when he was a teenager. Not only that, but Joseph had every reason in the world to be angry and cynical. His mother died when he was 9 years old. His brothers hated him. His brothers tried to kill him. His brothers sold him as a slave. His father thought he was dead. His brothers wished he was dead. His mother was dead. He had every reason in the world to be angry, to be in therapy. Yet, even though he was a trauma victim, Joseph somehow manages to exhibit an extraordinary amount of cognitive empathy. Take a look at the Rebbe, how our Rebbe does a psychological profile on Joseph in text 12, page 20. Joseph has been made to suffer the greatest injustices. He was sold as a slave in Egypt and then jailed without guilt. One might have expected him to be embittered, angry at the world. There was no due process when he was sent into the dungeon for 10 years. Nevertheless, when he noticed that Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker looked unusually distraught, he approached them and inquired, "Why are your faces poorly today? Why do you look so sad?" Joseph descended from Abraham, regarding whom God proclaimed that he would command his children and his household after him to keep God's ways by doing righteousness and justice. Consequently, upon seeing one of God's creatures in a mood quite the contrary of joyful, after all, the mere recognition that a person is a creation of the Holy One could be a sufficient cause for joy, Joseph took the fact that the matter had caught his attention as evidence that the matter was relevant to him. Therefore, he immediately sought to be of assistance. Joseph is a role model for us of how to be empathetic, at least on the first level of cognitive empathy, of at least being aware of being conscious of the pain of another person. In fact, in Psalms of David, in the 41st Psalm, you'll see it in text 13, the Medrash explains this interesting word called maskil, when it says here, "Praised be one who understands, maskil, those who are in need." What does it mean to understand those who are in need? It means that not only do you give them what they need, you don't just give them the charity that they need, maybe if they're poor, but you actually understand their pain. It's a cognitive empathy which we're called upon to achieve. What does understand mean in this context? It refers to one who carefully considers and reflects on the strategy to sustain the person in need. For example, when a wealthy person faces a drastic downturn, the understanding benefactor visits the formerly wealthy person and says, "I heard that an inheritance will be coming your way in such and such a location, and that so-and-so owes you money." So he's giving him dignity, not just a handout. "If you wish, accept the sum from me, and when that inheritance comes to you, or when that debtor repays the debt, you can pay me back." This person understands those who are in need. Friends, this level of cognitive empathy is vital for relationships, for friendships. It applies not only to people that are down in the gutter, who need compassion, who need tzedakah, but it's actually critical for our friendships with our peers to be able to allow our friends to feel felt, to feel that we know how they are feeling. This cognitive empathy is key to enhanced relationships. And quite frankly, there is no possibility of reaching that degree of cognitive empathy unless you're able to move away from your default animal soul, selfish setting towards your godly soul, which is selfless and truly welcoming another with unconditional love and with no strings attached, without ulterior motives.